Look into the mirror, not at the reflection of your face, but at that subtle, almost imperceptible vibration deep in your eyes when you encounter something truly repulsive. Not ordinary evil, no, but something that should seemingly evoke righteous anger, yet instead generates a strange, uncomfortable attraction, or conversely, a furious, almost hysterical repulsion. I'm talking about those moments when you see the Joker on screen, laughing amidst a world in ruins, or Darth Vader cloaked in absolute all-consuming power, or Tyler Durden dismantling the very foundations of conventional existence. In response to this abyss, some of us, those who consider themselves enlightened, evolved, capable of empathy, suddenly feel an uncontrollable itch, perplexity, and sometimes, this is the most terrifying part, a vague, almost shameful sympathy that we immediately want to suppress. I'm referring to that hypocritical grimace that distorts our faces when we, with ostentatious, almost theatrical righteousness, brand these characters as pure evil, dangerous contagion, absolute madness. We turn away so diligently, express our disgust so demonstratively, distance ourselves so desperately from their abyss that it becomes a performance worthy of its own drama. For behind this feigned revulsion, behind this meticulously tailored moral corset that we so tightly lace up in public, lies not merely condemnation, but something far more unsettling. It hides a hatred of the shadow, of that which we have so carefully repressed, packed into the farthest corner of our psyche, securely sealed off and declared persona non grata. This shadow is our inner exile, that very aspect of our soul that was once rejected, silenced, locked away in the dungeon of the subconscious because society or our parents or we ourselves decided it was too much. Too ambitious not to evoke envy, too aggressive not to disturb the peace, too vulnerable not to show weakness, too free to fit within convenient boundaries. And every time the Joker dances down the stairs, subverting conventions, or Vader breathes, filling the space with absolute power, or Tyler Durden delivers his manifesto, tearing down facades, this exile within us beats against the walls of its prison, demanding recognition. Our irritation, our disgust, it is nothing more than a panicked fear that this ancient, long-forgotten door will swing open, releasing what we have kept locked away for so long. We are convinced that this irritation is not just an annoying side effect, but an undeniable sign of our virtue, our impeccable correctness. We wear it like a banner as proof of our moral superiority. But what if I told you that precisely at this point of acute discomfort, in this place of dull, almost physical internal resistance, lies your greatest unrevealed resource, that this very inner exile, whom we so desperately try to ignore, disregard, and lock away with 7 locks, holds within it not only shameful secrets, but also the keys to your authentic, unfabricated strength, to your wholeness, to the ability to see the world not in tiresome black and white tones, but in an endless, living palette of shades. To acknowledge this shadow does not mean to become it, nor to dissolve into its dark depths. It means to free yourself from the exhausting need to constantly fight against what is an integral, living part of yourself. It means to stop being a hostage to your own prohibitions, your own imposed beliefs, your own paralyzing fear of the unknown, yet powerful within you. But why does this mechanism work so flawlessly? Why do we so stubbornly, with such fanatical persistence, reject what so obviously pulsates within us, what is so clearly reflected in the allure of these shadowy characters. To understand this, we need to return to the scene of the very first transgression. We've discussed the shadow, its allure, and how it sometimes evokes paradoxical feelings within us. But where does this inner exile come from? This fragment of the soul that, though rejected, nonetheless persistently knocks at the doors of our consciousness through the images of the Joker, Darth Vader, Tyler Durden. It was not born in a vacuum. Its exile is not an act of original sin, but rather a consequence of a complex, sometimes painful process of adapting to the world. Recall, at what exact point in your personal geography, at what invisible crossroads of childhood games and adult admonitions, did you realize that certain dimensions of your being, vital for the fullness of existence, were henceforth forbidden? When were you first whispered to, or perhaps shouted at, that your ambition, that very inner force that drives you to achievement, to expanding the boundaries of yourself, was something to be shyly turned away from, that it was excessive, selfish, or even dangerous? When genuine, healthy aggression, that very spark capable of protecting your boundaries, asserting your truth, and safeguarding you from being absorbed by others' narratives, was branded as anger, rudeness, and unacceptable display, leading to condemnation and isolation, when the right to make mistakes, to stumble and fall, to be imperfect, to the very process of seeking and finding oneself through trials, was replaced by a panicked fear of censure, of being wrong, of the inevitable label of failure. Or perhaps when your vulnerability, that fragile yet authentic fabric of the soul, capable of deep connection, compassion, and unconditional acceptance of the world and yourself within it, was declared a weakness, requiring concealment, disguise, and the erection of impenetrable walls. When you were instilled with the belief that exposing your pain, your doubts, your fears meant condemning yourself to even greater pain, to exploitation, to contempt, it was in those moments, in those invisible yet deep cracks in the foundation of your selfhood, that this inner exile was born. It was not exiled from without, you exiled it yourself, obeying an unspoken code of acceptability propagated by the voices that shaped your world, parents, teachers, peers, societal dogmas. It is the ambition you buried under a heap of doubt so as not to seem too much. It is the anger you swallowed so as not to be considered bad. It is the tears you held back so as not to show your weakness. It is the audacity you curbed so as not to stand out from the crowd. It is who you could have been, but who you were forbidden to be. And so when on screen the Joker laughs at the society that rejected him, Darth Vader embraces his dark, powerful side, and Tyler Durden shatters conventional frameworks. They resonate with this exile within us. They give it a voice, albeit a distorted, even destructive one. They show it a world where its qualities not only exist, but possess a certain power, both frightening and alluring. This is not sympathy for evil, but a longing for the unrecognized aspects of one's own soul, for those parts of it that were condemned to oblivion. This mechanism of exile, this act of disavowing a part of oneself, is not a unique drama of an individual. It is woven into the very fabric of human existence. Echoes of it can be found in ancient myths and in the most modern narratives, for there is something common in how we, human beings, learn to turn away from our authentic, unpolished self. We have already touched upon the idea that this discomfort, this strange, almost shameful attraction to cinematic shadows is nothing more than a call from the depths. But why is it so persistent, so pervasive, so paradoxical? The answer lies in the universality of the mechanism by which the shadow is formed, and in the relentless nature of its demands presented from the very heart of our being. For the shadow is not merely a collection of suppressed qualities, not just an accumulation of rejected traits. It is a part of us that we were once forced to banish in the process of adapting to the world, to our tribe, family, society, culture. Imagine an ancient ritual, one who violated an unspoken taboo, who displayed something too much, be it rage, excessive joy, inappropriate ambition, or conversely, naked vulnerability, was cast out, exiled beyond the circle, deprived of the warmth of the communal fire and protection. They wander into the night, into the wild forest of consciousness, but their shadow, their unlearned lesson, their unpaid debt remains to hover over the tribe, over everyone who witnessed that exile. Similarly, within us, those qualities that were branded as unacceptable, inconvenient, dangerous, were cast down into the boundless plains of our subconscious, condemned to eternal internal exile. And here, the relentless law of being comes into play. Energy does not disappear. It merely changes form. What has been exiled does not dissolve into non-existence. It accumulates, transforming into a kind of unpaid bill energy. This bill is presented constantly, whispering from the depths, demanding recognition, integration. An unrecognized shadow is an eternal creditor who will not allow us to find true peace and wholeness until its claims are satisfied. This is not a demand to become what we have exiled, not a call to destruction, but an insistent request to see it, to acknowledge its existence, and then to integrate its energy into a constructive channel, transforming weakness into a resource and pain into wisdom. Otherwise, this energy will find an outlet in destructive projections, in inexplicable hatred toward those who dare to be free from our own prohibitions. Recall the ancient myth of Cain. He committed a crime and was exiled, but his exile was not only physical from the Garden of Eden and from the Lord's presence. He was exiled from grace, from universal brotherhood, and a mark was placed upon him. This mark is not just a symbol, it is the symbol of his inner shadow, his unrecognized aggression, his envy, which led to fratricide. And even after his exile, his destiny, his descendants bore this imprint, this unpaid energy, which manifested in the world again and again through wars, strife, new crimes. Cain became the archetype of the eternal outcast, but also the eternal bearer of the unaccepted part of the human soul, which being rejected continues to knock at the doors of consciousness through pain, through an inexplicable pull towards what seems alien and dangerous, or through an irrational repulsion towards what is too vivid a reflection of our own inner exile. This is why when we encounter cinematic embodiments of this shadow, be it the Joker, Darth Vader, or Tyler Durden, we feel this deep resonance. They are not merely villains, not simply antagonists in the usual sense. They are mirrors reflecting the invisible facets of our own exile, those archetypal forms that we so diligently hide from ourselves and the world, but which, being rejected, continue to live their own lives, sometimes taking on the most unexpected and frightening guises. If the cinema screen is not just a collection of stories, but also a magical mirror capable of reflecting the most hidden corners of our soul, then what images evoke in us not just rejection, but genuine, burning, sometimes irrational contempt? Take a moment to consider what types of characters, whether on screen or in life, provoke in you not just dislike, but genuine, irrational hatred, burning contempt, inexplicable irritation, as if they touch something deeply forbidden within you. It's not those who display charismatic evil or tragic struggle like the Joker or Darth Vader. No, it's those who embody another facet of the shadow, one we have suppressed with particular cruelty, one that triggers a panicked fear of becoming it. Among these anti-heroes of our inner world, these projections of the inner exile, several archetypes can be distinguished that are capable of awakening deep aversion within us. The first is the petty tyrant, or if you will, the bureaucratic monster. This is not a great dictator whose name echoes through the ages, but a figure whose power stems not from strength of spirit or grand design, but from blind, soulless adherence to the letter of the rules, from a need to control and suppress the slightest manifestations of life. Their authority is an authority over trifles, over daily life, but it is precisely this that can suffocate the breath of freedom and spontaneity. Recall that school teacher who, with a soulless face, confiscated drawings if they were too bright, or that official who, with a stony expression, denied a simple certificate because one comma was missing. These are not grand villains, not titans of evil, but their petty, lifeless power, their adherence to the letter rather than the spirit, can unleash a storm of irrational aversion within us. They are the living embodiment of that very exile who once forbade us from being free, loud, alive, spontaneous. They are the echo of that internal censorship that whispered, "Don't stand out, don't take risks, be convenient." The second archetype is the self-absorbed moralist, or the hypocritical righteous. This is not one who seeks truth, but one who, with a caustic sneer or sanctimonious pomposity, judges others, elevating themselves on a pedestal of their own imagined virtue. They see no log in their own eye, but delight in pointing out the speck in another's, reveling in their imagined infallibility. This image evokes such fierce antipathy because it exposes our own fear of being judged, our inner need to conform to others' expectations, and simultaneously our suppressed shadow of judgment and self-righteousness. And finally, the third, the devouring victim or the emotional vampire. This is not a wounded soul seeking healing, but one who constantly demands attention, sympathy, and energy, often through manipulation, disguised as feigned helplessness or endless suffering. Their groan is not a plea, but a demand. Their weakness is not vulnerability, but armor through which they drain life force. They evoke irrational repulsion because they mirror our own suppressed fear of being a burden, of being dependent, or our inability to set healthy boundaries, our tendency towards codependency. These figures, these mirrors of our unaccepted parts, show us not only what we hate, but also what we once exiled from ourselves. And in this hatred, in this rejection, lies not only pain, but also the key to understanding what power, what right we denied ourselves, hiding it deep within the shadow. The air, once thick with the echoes of our inner tyrants, moralists, and victims, now begins to clear, revealing not monsters, but distorted reflections. For in the crucible of the shadow, even the most grotesque forms are merely twisted visages of exiled virtues, of life forces banished from the sovereign territory of the self. Every demon we encountered earlier, the petty tyrant, the self-absorbed moralist, the devouring victim, carries within its distorted core the seed of a deep, unrecognized strength. Consider the petty tyrant, that coiled serpent of control and aggression, whose venomous bite once seemed purely destructive. What if its true essence, before being banished to the barren lands of the unconscious, was an unconditional self-affirmation, a primal right to define one's boundaries, to occupy one's space in the world, to lead and act with unwavering conviction? This is the raw, untamed force of self-determination, the courage to forge one's own path, even when it diverges from the well-trodden road. How often in our own lives have we stifled the roar of our authentic will, fearing to appear demanding, selfish, or overly ambitious? We may have denied ourselves the very right to lead, to command, to simply be powerful without apology. And so when a figure like Darth Vader strides across the screen, embodying absolute, albeit dark, power, a part of us, starved for that very self-possession, can only watch in conflicted awe. We admire not the evil, but the terrifying, undeniable force of will. Then there's the self-absorbed moralist, that self-appointed judge, whose pronouncements once seemed to issue from a place of cold, unyielding arrogance. Yet beneath the brittle shell of condemnation lies a deep, yearning core, the unquestionable right to one's own truth, a profound source of self-worth that needs no external validation, an integrity born from an inner compass. This is the capacity for true discernment, for standing firm in one's values, not to judge others, but to live authentically. How many times have we sacrificed our deepest convictions on the altar of public opinion, fearing the sting of disapproval, the label of wrong or misguided? We may have denied ourselves the right to trust our own inner knowing, to stand firm on our unique moral landscape. And so when a character, however twisted, like the Joker, utterly rejects social norms and constructs his own chaotic yet internally consistent morality, there is a perverse fascination, not with the destruction, but with the radical, unburdened freedom from external judgment, a freedom we may have long relinquished. And finally, the devouring victim, whose passive aggression and manipulative helplessness once sucked the very air out of a room. What if her true exiled heart was the sacred right to vulnerability and authentic connection, a profound capacity to lean into interdependence, to ask for help without shame, to receive care without guilt? This is the strength found in genuine need, the courage to reveal one's raw humanity, to simply be without the constant pressure to perform or prove. How often have we erected impenetrable walls around our fragility, fearing to be a burden, to be seen as weak, or to open ourselves to the possibility of being consumed by others' needs? We may have denied ourselves the right to be truly seen, truly supported, truly human in our imperfections. And so, when a figure like Tyler Durden appears, a primal, untamed force born from the deepest reaches of suppressed weakness, and social invalidation. A primal resonance occurs. He is the raw scream of a soul refusing to be a victim, yet tragically still trapped in a destructive cycle of dependence on the very system he despises. The attraction here is to the unfettered expression of primal self-sufficiency, even when it devolves into chaos, because we have denied ourselves the simple right to simply be without apology or pretense. The question then coils around us, demanding an answer. What vital capacity, what inherent right have you yourself exiled into the dim recesses of your shadow, mistakenly believing its potent force to be a mere vice? And how does this act of internal banishment, this refusal to integrate the full spectrum of your being, subtly yet profoundly shape your perception of those magnetic, unsettling antagonists on screen? They are not just villains. They are distorted mirrors reflecting the very forces you have locked away, the very freedoms you have denied yourself. And the fascination they evoke is often merely the whisper of your own unlived life, a longing for the wholeness you have fragmented. This interplay between what we suppress and what we project is a delicate dance, often leading to unforeseen consequences, not only in our interpretation of the grand narratives unfolding before us, but also in the silent dramas of our own existence. We have spoken of the inner exile, of those aspects of our soul that have been rejected, driven into the dark corners of consciousness, transforming into phantoms that haunt us from the depths of the subconscious. And so when the screen flashes with images of the Joker, Darth Vader, or Tyler Durden, when they challenge the conventional, when their actions scream of rebellion against systems that also hold us captive, it is precisely then that the inner exile begins its silent yet powerful dance. Consider, if you see the Joker merely as a mad terrorist devoid of all humanity, you not only miss the subtle threads of social critique woven into his character, but you also refuse to acknowledge the part of yourself that yearns for justice, albeit in a distorted form. Your unwillingness to gaze into his abyss is not merely a viewer's stance. It is a projection, a fear of confronting your own, perhaps righteous but suppressed anger at the world's injustices. You condemn his chaos because you fear your own meticulously locked away order. This leads to an impoverished perception of the film, transforming a deep psychological exploration into a flat story of good versus bad. And in life, this translates into an inability to understand the motives of others, to accept their otherness, to see the pain behind aggression, the disillusionment behind cynicism. Or Darth Vader, if for you he is merely a symbol of absolute evil, then you overlook the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker, his fall, his attempt to gain control, his desperate struggle with himself. You don't see how the thirst for power, originally intended to protect loved ones, turned into destruction. In this categorical condemnation lies your own fear of power, of the responsibility it carries, of the potential for error. Perhaps you yourself avoid leadership, are afraid to take the initiative in making decisions because deep down you fear becoming a tyrant like him. This leads to you relinquishing your positions, allowing others to dictate terms, preferring the safety of inaction to the risk of asserting your own will. And Tyler Durden? If you perceive him exclusively as a destructive anarchist, then you close your eyes to the rebellion against consumerism, the search for authenticity, the liberation from societal chains, even if through radical methods. Your rejection of his image is not just a rejection of violence. It is perhaps an unwillingness to acknowledge your own yearning for freedom, for the destruction of illusions, for the renunciation of imposed values. You are afraid to dismantle your house of cards of comfort, even if it has long become your prison. This fear makes you cling to the familiar, avoid any changes, even those that could lead to true self-discovery and liberation. How does your fear of being like these demons, the petty tyrant, the self-absorbed moralist, or the devouring victim whom we discussed earlier, compel you to make disadvantageous decisions or to avoid a deep understanding of the darker sides in yourself and others? Perhaps you avoid expressing your opinion at work, fearing to appear a tyrant, even though your idea could save the project. Or you remain silent when you see injustice, afraid of being labeled a moralist, even though your voice could change the situation. Perhaps you refuse to ask for help, fearing to appear a victim, thereby depriving yourself of support and condemning yourself to loneliness. But these characters are villains, someone might exclaim, and trying to understand them means justifying their misdeeds. No, to understand does not mean to justify. To integrate the shadow does not mean to become it. Acknowledging your ambition does not turn you into a dictator, and recognizing your vulnerability does not make you an eternal victim. On the contrary, it gives you the power to manage these energies instead of being their slave. When you refuse to see the complexity in the Joker, you refuse to see the complexity in yourself and in the world. When you close your eyes to the humanity in Vader, you deny the possibility of redemption and transformation in each of us. When you reject Tyler's call for freedom, you may be stifling your own soul's cry for authenticity. The unaccepted shadow becomes an invisible conductor of your life, making you dance to a tune you don't even realize. It prevents you from seeing the world's pictures in their full depth, distorts your perception of characters, stripping them of their volume, and you of the opportunity to learn from their fates. It holds you back from bold actions, from sincere conversations, from making important decisions, because you fear that the very exile you have hidden for so long will awaken within you. However, there is another side to this same coin, not just repulsion, but also an unseen attraction, not just fear, but admiration, which can also become an invisible cage. Our journey into the depths of the psyche does not end at the threshold of the shadow that casts darkness onto the screen, making us recoil from our own suppressed aggressions or unspoken truths. There is another, no less insidious projection woven from radiance, yet just as firmly holding us captive in unconsciousness. If the rejected exile whispers of what we flee from, its twin, the golden exile, beckons to what we so passionately desire, but do not allow ourselves to attain. Imagine there is not only the shadow we demonize, but also the shadow we deify. We call it the golden shadow, the repository of those qualities, talents, abilities, and virtues of ours that seem so great, unique, or unattainable that we unwittingly bestow them upon others. We project our own greatness onto cinematic heroes, self-help gurus, charismatic leaders, those who seemingly embody an ideal. It is easier for us to admire them than to acknowledge that the same spark, the same potential, the same radiance slumbers within ourselves. This is not a rejection of evil, but a rejection of one's own grandeur, a fear of being too visible, too influential, to oneself. Recall our previous discussion about the discomfort we feel towards the Joker or Vader. That was a signal of a suppressed right to aggression or rebellion. The golden shadow, however, manifests in our admiration for their charisma, their strategic thinking, their ability to influence the world, qualities we might fear to acknowledge within ourselves, lest we be perceived as arrogant or power-hungry. We are willing to spend hours analyzing their genius while simultaneously ignoring our own. This projection is a form of self-sabotage. For every time we put someone on a pedestal, we unconsciously deplete ourselves, giving away a piece of our strength, our potential, our inner light. We become mere observers of someone else's triumph, not the architects of our own. Why do we act this way? Society, with its unspoken rules of modesty and humility, often teaches us to downplay our strengths. It's easier for us to admire someone else's courage than to be courageous ourselves, someone else's wisdom than to trust our own intuition, someone else's creativity than to unleash our unique voice. We are subconsciously convinced that all the good spots are taken, that we can't be that brilliant, and so we hand over our unrealized gifts to others, projecting them onto external figures. This creates an illusion of safety. If I don't express these qualities, I don't risk rejection. I don't risk making mistakes. I don't risk encountering envy or misunderstanding. But the price of this peace is a life lived at half strength in the shadow of someone else's greatness. And now we come to a pivotal question that pierces the fabric of reality like a beam of light through a dense fog of illusions. Pause for a moment and look within yourself. Who is your true idol or object of intense admiration in film, psychology, self-development, or even among your acquaintances? What specific qualities in these individuals make your heart beat faster and your mind race? What are your own talents? What unrealized abilities, what sparks of genius have you unwittingly gifted to them, projecting your golden shadow onto their shining image? Let this question be the starting point for a new inner journey, for recognizing both sides of the exile, both the dark and the golden, is the first step toward achieving true wholeness. And if we learn to see not only what repels us, but also what attracts us as reflections of our own resources, then the path to true mastery over our lives will open before us. Every unaccepted part, every exiled aspect of our soul continues its sorrowful journey in internal banishment, casting a shadow on our world, distorting our perception, and depriving us of wholeness. For years, we have built walls around our uncomfortable qualities, sending them into voluntary confinement, thereby depriving ourselves not only of their potentially destructive power, but also of their wisdom, their energy, their true might. Simultaneously, we have bowed before the greatness of others, unaware that this greatness is merely an echo of our own unrevealed gifts, our golden shadow, which we also exiled, deeming ourselves unworthy or incapable of carrying such a burden. But what if I told you it's time to dismantle these invisible prisons? It's time to bring home not only those we considered demons, aggression, jealousy, selfishness, but also those we mistakenly took for gods. Boundless potential, creative power, absolute confidence. True wholeness is not a flight from darkness, nor a pursuit of light, but a courageous embrace of your being's full spectrum. It is the bravery to acknowledge that every Joker, every Vader, every Tyler is not merely a projection of your fear or admiration, but a mirror reflecting your own as yet unaccepted facets. Allow this realization to be your guide. Take one of these cinematic titans, the Joker, whose chaotic freedom beckons and frightens, Darth Vader, whose tragic power makes you tremble, or Tyler Durden, whose uncompromising will stirs. Immerse yourself in the sensations this character evokes. What exactly about them causes repulsion? What quality seems monstrous, unacceptable, threatening, and what conversely attracts you like a magnet, sparking a secret, perhaps forbidden admiration? Write down these qualities without judgment, without censorship. Now, the most important part, dare to ask yourself, where does this monstrous part live within me? Perhaps it's suppressed aggression that society has condemned, but which, when integrated, can become a powerful force for protecting your boundaries and asserting your true needs. Perhaps it's envy you hide, but which, when acknowledged, can point to your true desires and become a driving force for their realization. And where has this admirable potential been exiled? Perhaps it's ambition, suppressed by fear of failure or rejection of success, but which, when embraced, can become a catalyst for great achievements. Perhaps it's charisma or a creative gift you considered the prerogative of the chosen few, but which lie dormant within you, awaiting their moment. This is not a call to become a copy of these characters, but an invitation to the deepest act of self-discovery. It's an invitation to understand that their energy is your energy, simply distorted, trapped, or unused. Every exile you bring home enriches your inner empire, making you more whole, stronger, more authentic. You cease to be a hostage to your projections, gaining the freedom to see the world and yourself without distortion. When we begin to gather these scattered parts of ourselves, the world around us transforms. Projections vanish, illusions dissolve, and then we begin to see not only how the shadow manifests in other stories, but also how it shapes the very fabric of our perception, influencing which stories we choose to listen to, tell, and most importantly, live. For beyond individual exile, there is something greater, a collective whisper weaving its patterns into our shared